Hey everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy August 1st, 2017 to you and yours. It's a Tuesday, and it's the first day officially of Florida State football season, and it's so good to have you here. It's an all-football show today, and when I say all-football show, I don't mean just we're going to talk a little bit of football later. I mean from start to finish, something and everything today, except maybe the end, because I think we've got a little something. We got a little something for you at the end of the show. But outside of that, everything from while you were sleeping to our interviews to the conversations you're going to hear has something to do with Florida State football. And the fact that we can do that from start to finish is a glorious, glorious thing. My name is Ryan Kelly. You're currently listening to the voice of the Director of Digital Media at warchant.com. Drew's not here again. As we mentioned, he's out for a couple weeks, but there is somebody on the other side of the glass, and we'll get to that in 1 second. But first of all, did want to get to you and say thank you for waking up with us here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio. And, of course, the TuneIn Radio app on our own WTSM app. Thanks so much for listening there. It might be our podcast that you're listening to. You know where you can get that by now. iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com, YouTube. That list goes on and on and on. radio@warchant.com is your email address. And finally, at Wake Up War Chant's your Twitter account if you like to keep your musings to 140 characters or less. Like I said, there is someone on the other side of the glass, and when I found out that we were going to be looking for different perspectives all throughout these next couple weeks, fall camp, there's so many different thoughts on what this Florida State team is, what it can be. I thought it would be fun to every now and then throughout fall camp get an outsider's perspective, get somebody who's maybe a little bit different, maybe a little greener, a little newer to Tallahassee, but he's no stranger to radio. Done this for quite some time. That's WCTV's Fletcher Keel, the web producer over there, doing a good job with the sports stuff. And you're starting, what, month 2 at CTV?
Yeah, today, since it's August, will be the beginning of my third month. I came in the beginning of June, and it's hard to believe that I've already been here for 3 months. It's been awesome.
And, of course, you're no stranger to radio either.
No, I'm not. I've before moving into the TV realm, I spent 2 years in minor league baseball play-by-play, and before that did all sorts of student media and student radio shows and things like that. So being in front of the mic is very familiar to me. It's working at CTV and not really being in front of anything that's kind of taken a little bit of getting used to.
And, of course, you have to flash those credentials at the front, because I can't just have you come on and I mean, listen, we pride ourselves in good radio at 97.9. We can't just have somebody going, who is this mook?
Exactly.
So, but it is good to have you, Fletcher, and like I said, it's good to have you joining us. First day of football season, a lot of hype. Florida State, according to some, is a favorite for the college football playoff. According to some members of the ACC media, they're not even who should win their division. There was a good number of folks, not nearly a majority, but I mean, there was a decent number of folks who actually voted for Clemson to win the Atlantic to a certain extent. You know, I mean, ACC title game, but let's face it, the ACC title game is going to be played in Clemson, South Carolina, first week of November, more often than not, unless Miami comes out and surprises a lot of folks or somebody outside of the coastal, because you just don't think Louisville's got the firepower. But Fletcher, you've been in Tallahassee, like you said, for about a quarter of a year now, which is it feels a lot longer when you say it like that. But as an outsider, as a stark raving college football fan, like I know you are, what's your impression of the hype and the build around Tallahassee?
It's a little interesting because I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, kind of in the middle of SEC country, grew up pulling for an SEC team, and there you know the players. You know who's going to be good, who's expected to be bad, and then maybe every year you'll get an Ole Miss jumping to number 3 kind of out of nowhere. So this has been my first offseason kind of delving into the ins and outs of the ACC, and I don't think I've ever seen a team where people say, oh, they could be the conference title winners. They could make the college football playoff. And then almost just as many people are saying, they'll have a good year, but that'll be it. They might get a New Year's Six bowl. They might be second or third in the division. There's a lot of parity just within Florida State, and it's really interesting to see. And as someone who hasn't watched a ton of Seminoles football intently, I wasn't even privy to the fact that they're on, a 5-6 year double-digit win streak. Last year, I knew they were all right. I remember them being real good and then falling off a little bit, but I completely forgot that they wound up winning 10 games. So it's just a matter of the pieces that I'll get. This is going to be the most cliche thing of all, but the pieces coming back, can they fill either what they couldn't do last year or step up in a big way? And then guys who left and newcomers coming in, they need to obviously fill those spots as well.
You know, you mentioned it. Jimbo Fisher's about to start his 8th season at Florida State. 6 of those 7 seasons have been double-digit win seasons outside of the 2011 year. And, you know, you mentioned something. You mentioned from an outsider, and I think this is a good point because I do think this is something that on the inside, Florida State fans and those that cover Florida State that have just kind of been insulated in, double-digit win seasons and bowl games and Atlantic Division titles and ACC championship games and ACC titles. Sometimes it gets lost that until 2013, for a very, very long time, even to a certain extent in the lost decade, when there were years where it seemed like Florida State was going to get it together. This was the year that everything was going to be back together for Florida State under Bobby Bowden. And then especially in those first couple years under Jimbo Fisher, it always seemed like Florida State would lose that game that they weren't supposed to. They would always stub their toe. And you could even say that about a couple of those teams in the dynasty years, in the 1990s. I feel like this is a big year for Florida State in that you kind of have to deliver in the eyes of the public because the goodwill of that 2013 and that 2014 run that was so impressive is starting to maybe, I don't want to say go away, but a lot of people had high expectations for you last year. And when you move into this next season, and if you don't deliver, a lot of those same questions of, is Florida State the program that can't get it done, might come up again.
Yeah, and kind of unfair for a program that has had 5 straight 10-win seasons, but you're not only a part of a country, but you're a part of a program, be it covering him or just a fan of him, maybe a student right now, and you're steeped in that history. You're just a couple of years removed from national title game. You're in the same conference as the team who won it last year. You know you can go head-to-head with them at any given year.
Some would argue maybe you should have won that game.
Yeah, that as well. And looking at the schedule this year, the one bummer about opening up against Alabama is you really don't know what this team is going to be yet. You can have all sorts of inclinations as we approach camp. You can have all sorts of thoughts and inclinations as you see who's coming back and what 5-star recruits are coming to campus. But until you get on the field against Alabama, you're not going to really know. And that can be good if they surprise you and they win the game or they lose real close. But what if it's, say, a 20-point Alabama victory, or maybe even greater than that? What is that going to do to the confidence of this team, and will it become a what could have been type of year?
Well, it's the idea that you feel like a team can get better as it goes along, much like last year's Florida State squad. And I think Florida State's got a decent shot at winning the game. I wouldn't pick them to win if I had to pick it straight up right now, but like you mentioned, there's a lot of talent coming back on this team. Mm-hmm. That defense is going to be really, really good. Bo Scarborough's coming off an injury. You don't really know what to think about Jalen Hurts. If you can keep Alabama from scoring points, you don't have to do a ton on the offensive side of the football rather than play it safe, don't turn the ball over, and just be smart. Make smart decisions, score enough to win this game. That's really what it comes down to on that end. But it also goes to Alabama's going to get the benefit of the doubt until they lose one of these season openers, much like how a lot of people last year, a lot of folks like that Clemson team, but many in the national media and many pundits and many just fans in general still picked Alabama in that game because it's just the idea that they are going to win that game until you see them not win that game. It finally happened in that bowl game.
Yep.
Now you have to see if it can happen in that kickoff.
Yeah, exactly. And a couple of those question marks heading into that game is it's as frustrating as it can be for a college football fan to say the Alabama game is week 2 and the Chick-fil-A game is the second or third week of the season. So say FSU starts the season against ULM, as frustrating as a game as that is for fans, football's back, but you kind of know what the result's going to be.
It's the dry run for a fan.
Exactly. It's the unofficial scrimmage. I think it's Syracuse. They open up with a FCS school in Central Connecticut or Coastal Connecticut, and so
I didn't even know that was a thing.
I didn't either until I saw the schedule. But you kind of want a game to see, okay, for example, who's going to be able to replace Dalvin Cook in the backfield? Is Francois going to be going to have to rely on his running a little more, or will someone else emerge? That's a game like the ULM game is one that you want to kind of mix and match and test the strategy there, as opposed to going up against Alabama where everyone's going to have their eyes on you. It's the first game of that new stadium up in Atlanta. You know who you're going up against, and you don't really know 100% what's going to be out on the field.
Overall, Florida State, Alabama, there's a reason that the Chick-fil-A folks are putting it out as the greatest opener of all time, because it is. And there's a lot of hype surrounding this game. And just like a lot of folks, I wish September 2nd was already here. I wish we were watching football. But
we have another month of this?
But we've got plenty of questions throughout fall camp. We've got plenty of conjecture. We've got plenty of what we can and can't see with our eyes. And I know our own Gene Williams and Ryan Clark are both going to join us in this show. And they're both going to be chomping at the bit to know exactly what we can know about this 2017 squad. But before we do that, let's get you caught up on all the other things going on in college football. This, folks, is While You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning.
Wake up!
Wake up. Wake me up.
Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
As I mentioned, it's all college football talk today, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the more interesting, not on-the-field stuff, but some of the eyebrow raisers that you look at across college football as fall camp opens up. We'll start right down the road. UCF kicker Donald De La Haye. He ends up leaving the team. He ends up leaving college football because, I don't know if you know about this, but the argument between can he use his YouTube channel to talk about football and monetize those videos, the NCAA has said no, and he said thanks but no thanks to football and walked out. It stinks for him, but at the same time, you appreciate someone's taking a stand against this.
Yeah, you do. And if he really wanted to play, he could say, okay, fine, but this is more than just this. And a lot of the internet conversation today, Ryan, has been, oh, well, UNC is going to get a slap on the wrist for the basketball cheating scandal, or if this were an SEC program, would this really be the thing? It doesn't matter at what size it is or what type of player it is. Would it be different if it were UCF's quarterback as opposed to their kicker? Who's to say? The whole thing is ridiculous. The landscape, not only just of college sports and what a college athlete is, but of the society. I feel like I'm wagging my cane at some kids running across my lawn right now, but it's just ridiculous. And the NCAA, it seems like year after year, finds a way to do something even more ridiculous. This is that thing for 2017.
Turner Field has a brand new look over on the south side of Atlanta, and it's set for Georgia State football. I don't know if you guys have seen the pictures online yet, but I know a lot of Braves fans in the area will say, wow, that looks different.
Looks different, but it looks really good. I can't wait to head up, and I've never said these words before, but I look forward to seeing a Georgia State football game in person.
Hey, go Panthers.
Let's do it.
All right, finally, Oregon Ducks. Willie Taggart says there's going to be less uniform combinations this year for the Ducks. Of course, I like this. And I'm not one of those people who hates everything Oregon and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes here's the thing. When the uniform has become more the conversation than your team, which it most certainly had over the last couple of years under Helfrich after Mariota left, you've got to reset this program, and you've got to set a standard again to where, listen, that's great that we can come out and we can be Phil Knight's, poster child's male models, but at the end of the day, this is winning business. And the last guy got canned, and it didn't matter what uniforms he wore.
Yeah, and that was one of the first things I knew about a college football team outside of the Southeast was, hey, Oregon exists, and they have like 100 different combinations. The combination thing has kind of run its course. A different combination for 10 years of a head coach type of thing. Love Willie T, though, coach of my alma mater, Western Kentucky.
All right, folks, when we come back, it's our own Gene Williams previewing fall camp right on the other end. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. camp edition of Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. Practices here. Football season is finally underway, and nobody knows that better than the founder and administrator of warchant.com, the boss man himself, Mr. Gene Williams, who joins us over the phone line. Gene, happy football, sir.
Hey, happy football. It's finally here today. It's been a long time coming. I think we're ready for it.
Yes, sir. It's been a long time in the making, and now it's finally here. Of course, Jimbo Fisher talking to the media today. We already told you about that. Plenty of stuff happening around Florida State and practice, and, of course, just our website alone. Gene, you were telling me a little bit before the break a thing that we're getting ready to roll out that's pretty cool, and even if it wasn't my obligation for us to plug it, I would tell you to plug this anyway because this is a really good deal. Yeah,
may not, if you're listening live here on ESPN Radio, it may not quite be up on the site yet, but let me tell you later today, we're going to have it up. If you're not a subscriber, or maybe you canceled or your credit card lapsed at some point, now's a great time to get it, and it's a limited time deal. We've got thrown out the new hot off the presses War Chant t-shirt. You're going to get a nice metal Yeti-type tumbler that's a War Chant exclusive and a $25 gift card to Garnet Gold, and if that's not enough, next to 6 months added to your account. So check out warchant.com. It's Noles 2017, Noles 2017, and that'll get you in on the deal. And it's going to run out pretty quick, so you want to get on that this week.
That's a heck of a value. I would jump all over that. But, Gene, fall camp, we've only got so much time, so I'll be respectful of your time, make this somewhat brief and tight. I want to ask, first and foremost, the same question I asked Ira to start the fall camp preview. I keep saying every single season except fall, and I don't know why, but I keep doing it. Anyway, fall camp preview, here's your question. What do you think is the biggest question mark for Florida State headed into 2017? And here's your kicker. You can't say offensive line, and because Ira said it yesterday, you can't say wide receiver.
Oh, man, you're narrowing it down there. Well, I mean, the other thing is backup quarterback. I think that's obviously pretty huge because Florida State was frankly lucky. Obviously, DeAndre Francois, one of the toughest cats you'll ever run into, and we saw him just take whack after whack last season and just keep getting back up. But you can't expect that to happen again. You hope the line block's a little bit better for him. You hope he gets rid of the ball a little quicker and avoids some of that. But, I mean, I really want to know who's going to work into that spot and be the number 2 guy in there. So I'd kind of say that, along with kind of how does Jimbo Fisher handle the running backs, because it's a stable of talent. It's ridiculous. You've got 3 5-stars in that on the roster running back, and you got a guy like Amir Rasul, who's I think he was a Rivals 100 guy. He's a 10-4 guy in the 100. It gives you that top end speed, maybe something the other guys don't bring to the table. And one of the names I kept hearing, but nobody talks about, is Zaquandre White. And is having some conversations with people, and he was one of the probably top 2 or 3 standouts of the rookies over the summer workouts, and everybody's just raving about how good he is. So, I mean, it's just I don't know what Jimbo Fisher is going to do with all these very talented running backs, how that rotation is going to work. So that, to me, is a kind of a big question mark there, how that's all going to play out.
I think it's so funny that no matter who you ask, everybody, whenever you ask them what the biggest question mark is, it almost always falls on the offense, because let's face it, the only real question you have with the defense is the same question that is, I think, safe to ask after the beginning of last season, and that's a motor issue.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, I got to think it's just such a weird thing that happened last year. I've never seen that happen, especially for a Jimbo coach team. Maybe some of those teams in the late decade, you had some guys that maybe were a little loafing here and there, but I just think that was an aberration. I don't think I think this is different. Especially when I can't see having Derwin James back there and him seeing one of his teammates loafing and him putting up with that. I just think there's a different mentality. Jimbo Fisher the other night in Orlando when he had his Kids First function down there, talked a lot about, some people asked about having alphas on the team. We all reference back to that 2013, the LaMarcus Joyners, the Telvin Smiths, the Timmy Jernigans, the Jameis Winstons. I mean, there were alphas all over the place, and I think you've got a few more on this team. I think maybe a Derek Notty's really kind of going into that role up front. Obviously, Derwin James is the ultimate alpha, and I think when you have guys like that out there, the other players feed off of them, so I really don't see that being an issue. I just think that the question is, the defense can be really good. How good? And, will that, if they actually underachieve, I mean, that's going to fall right on Charles Kelly, and I don't think there'll be any excuses this year.
Yeah, there's certainly no doubt that there's one guy who's got that big crosshair on his back when it comes to having to perform, and I think it's certainly him. And on top of all that, Gene, it is interesting, though, for the second straight year, this is the second straight year that preseason, all that stuff, Jimbo Fisher, just about every single place he's talked, everywhere he's talked, has been exceedingly positive about this team. And usually he's a guy who likes to temper expectations or just kind of play it close to the vest. But you got to talk to him last week. Is it just me, or in his interview, did he just seem like he was rearing and ready to go?
Yeah, he was frankly giddy. I mean, he was like that when he spoke to the fans that were in Orlando. You heard the interview here on Wake Up War Chant last week I had with Coach Fisher. Real excited. He's always, you're right, he's always revved up in the preseason. But, I mean, you can definitely tell, it's at a different level. It hasn't been at this level for a few years that I think that he's this optimistic. And a couple of things we're really worried about. I think Ira mentioned it here yesterday, but, he, and I asked him in the interview, and some people asked about it, during the Q&A session about the offensive line. He's very optimistic about that line. He just says, look, they've identified the troubles they had last year. There's something that they can easily fix. I think he's also very excited about that 2016 offensive line class. We had 6 guys, and I've had people inside the program tell me several times that out of those 6 guys, there's not a dud in the bunch. They all are as good as advertised. They can all play. Now, they obviously lack a lot of experience, but it's one of the best line classes they've had around here in a while. Now we're going to get to see what those guys can do on the field. So I think the fact that the line, as he thinks, is going to be better than anticipated, and it amazing me how he's just raving about Keith Gavin, a guy that has never caught a pass at Florida State, but yet he's just acting like he is one of their top receivers, and he's going to be, one of the main go-to guys. He said he's one of the fastest players, or at least one of the fastest receivers on the team. And just all the things you're kind of worried about a little bit, he's raving about. Now, I didn't hear him raving about a backup quarterback, so, I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one, but he's definitely, haven't heard him like this since the Jameis Winston years.
You mentioned it with Jimbo, and you talked about it during the interview. He didn't really expound upon it much, but you mentioned earlier in our interview talking about alphas on this team, guys speaking up, guys being vocal. Sometimes that seemed like outside of DeMarcus Walker, Dalvin tried to be a leader, but Dalvin was more a lead by example type guy. Jalen Ramsey, as great as he was never the guy that you really thought of as, the unquestioned leader of a team in 2015. Florida State's kind of maybe missed some of that alpha presence on the field. But Jimbo was saying in your interview, even some freshmen have spoke up this year?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I followed up on that because when he addressed the crowd, he brought up, I guess they had their first kind of preseason meeting the other day, and I guess when he gets there and addresses the team, he gives it a chance for somebody to come up if a player wants to speak and say some things. And, it's the typical of, you heard Derwin gets up in the past. It's, Jameis Winston would get up, and it's all the usual. It's the veterans. It's the characters you expect to get up there. And he said when he did that, a true freshman who said who hadn't been around very long, so it told me it wasn't even an early enrollee, got up and walked up and just delivered really quite the stirring speech and was just saying we're a championship team. We're gonna come together as a team. We're gonna work our butts off, and just said all the things you would expect of a veteran team leader. And he said in all his years of coaching, going back to LSU and everywhere else, that he's never seen a freshman do that. And not only did it, he delivered. Now he wouldn't say who that player was. But just a couple of hints. If I had to guess, I think it's Marvin Wilson, just because you've been around Marvin, Ryan. You kind of know how outgoing that guy is, how competitive that guy is, and he's one of the alphas, let's say, that wasn't an early enrollee. So if I had to guess, I think it was probably Marvin Wilson that stepped up and gave that speech.
Yeah, if I was a betting man, I'd certainly put my money on that. You're right. He's outspoken. He's a fireball, and on top of that, he does back it up. He is. He does not look like a kid who should have been in prom a couple months ago. There's no doubt in my mind that he's a guy who can make an impact from day one. Finally, Gene, before I let you go, only a couple more minutes here. Headed out to practice today, fall camp. Well, I will say this. We don't know at the time that we're recording this if we're even headed out to practice on Tuesday because we don't have a schedule yet. But let's just say in a perfect world, we're headed out to watch that opening period of practice. What are you watching for today? Who are you looking for? Any upperclassmen that you're looking to see if they perform? Any freshmen that you're excited to see out on the field? Who are you personally looking forward to seeing?
That first day it's hard, especially to judge anybody. They're going to be out there in shorts, and they're really not going to, especially the parts we get to see, it's very limited. We're not going to get to see a whole lot. But I guess just who's going to line up on some of the offensive line, who's going to be that first-team left tackle? Will Everly, who missed all of spring and everything else, will he just get out there, trot out there with the first team at center position? What's that? Who are going to be this couple? We know the two wide receivers is it going to be Keith Gavin, Tate, and Murray? Are those going to be the three guys? So I guess I'm more looking for who's going to be the second quarterback they trot out there in the formation. I guess for me, it's more kind of a depth chart thing, who's going to line up where, because I don't think we're really going to, especially that first practice, we're not going to see much. Now, I haven't heard. Now, hopefully they open up, as they've done in the past, after Fan Day, have that open practice in Doak Campbell, and I think that's where you'll really start to get a good look at these guys when they start doing the 7-on-7s and 1-on-1s, who's really standing out.
Fair enough of a point, my friend. Well, anyway, Gene, I know you got to run, but thank you so much for joining us, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Great job.
All right, folks, there's more on the other end. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Sometimes I'm right, and I can be wrong. My own beliefs are in my song.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in War Chant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on War Chant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
On the opening day of fall camp, it only makes sense that we would talk about more football here on Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, and Township, all there in the heart of College Town. And, another War Chant staff member jumps aboard. Is the lead beat writer of warchant.com, Mr. Ryan Clark, on the phone line. Ryan, how are you, bud?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. And I want to tip the cap to you. I've had an educational experience going through reading all of your preview pieces that have been coming out over the last couple days. And I know, heck, folks, I will brag on the guy. When we were at ACC kickoff, my dude typed and researched and typed away at these things. If you're a premium member of warchant.com and you get these previews, make sure you're reading these. Make sure you're checking these out. Because, Ryan, while I got you here, not to butter you up, but you've done a great job on these.
Oh, wow, thank you. I will definitely have to bring you in when it comes contract renegotiation time. So there you go.
Yeah. I'm available as representation. I guess that's what I'm trying to
I won't go in that far, but no, I'm joking.
So anyway, the last time we talked mostly offense. We talked wide receivers, we talked quarterbacks, we talked running backs, and then we dabbled in the offensive line a little bit, but that story hadn't come out. Not all of that was ready to go, but it's when you're talking about Florida State football and you're talking about the questions that come into fall camp, Ryan, this is the top of everybody's list. It's the top concern. I know Jimbo Fisher has been very, very positive in what he said about that line. He seems to think that everybody's kind of overplaying the issue. When you did your research, what did you see?
I think it's the concerns that people have. And, I mean, granted, there's stuff that Fisher sees and his staff see that we may not be privy to, whether it's before the season starts, during, or after, but it's fair to have concerns. I mean, you're replacing the entire left side of your line. You don't know what the situation is going to be at center. You feel more secure about the right side. You wonder how Landon Dickerson will return from a knee injury. And then with Rick Leonard finally going through a full year of playing right tackle, you feel a lot more comfortable about his situation now compared to this time a year ago before they played Ole Miss.
Lots of folks on that line that are young. They like the depth, and everybody seems to really like what they brought. As a matter of fact, Gene Williams just got off the phone with him, and his interview said a lot of folks on that coaching staff says there doesn't seem to be a dud of any of them. And first of all, I've got a two-part question for you. First of all, who of those young guys outside of Bavion Johnson, Andrew Baselli, that we both know are in a battle to take that center job maybe from Alec Eberle, of those three, who outside of those guys do you think has the biggest chance to step forward? And two, because I know you know this because you love to bring it up, how many of those guys are younger than Google?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll answer the second question first, Landon Dickerson. So there you go. Aside from him, because, again, I think he's a penciled-in starter at right guard, I would say Josh Ball at left tackle. I mean, he seems to be someone that appears to be like the natural fit to replace Rod Johnson for the long term. I mean, someone who stands in, 6'7", 6'8", about 290, I want to say, without the roster in front of me. But he's someone that they had a lot of promise for when they signed him in that 2016 class. Really, all those players did. So I would say Josh Ball first, and again, not including the centers and Landon Dickerson. So I kind of think those are in a different scenario. But, I mean, I am fascinated to see what someone like Jawan Williams does as well as Mike Arnold. Because left guard, you would think that's a job that's going to go to Cole Minshew, someone the staff's been really high on. But you do wonder how those other two members of that class, Arnold and Williams, will do, just because they're the two of the six that have been signed. They're the only two so far that we really haven't heard a lot about in terms of what their role would be for 2017.
Moving on, offensive line, one more question for you there. Who do you think is the biggest piece that you have to replace and why?
That's so tough. I think it's a tie between replacing Rod Johnson and someone making an upgrade at center. And Everly could have improved because, I mean, he was playing last year with an injury. And maybe if he's fully healthy, you see a difference in play. But for now, it would probably be left tackle just because, yes, Rod Johnson's junior year wasn't as good as his sophomore year, but he was still the best lineman they had. And when you're trying to talk about what FSU does on the left side of the line, that's where a lot of the holes for the running game came, was on the left side. You talk about Francois' blind side, again, another important piece. So I would say it would probably be left tackle the more you think about it.
Moving on, let's go to the other side of the football, shall we? Defensive ends is the last preview that got put up on warchant.com, at least since we're taping this, Ryan. And when you look at it, last year you came into the season, you thought to yourself, there's a lot of talent, but maybe not quite the depth that there was in 2015 with the Windows formation and the dime rabbit is what they called it, where they'd put four ends on the field and they just let everybody go out and get it. Well, then Brian Burns happened, and you thought to yourself, man, we've got a little bit more depth than we thought, and now you have Josh Sweat and Brian Burns together, and you think that they can put together a really, really good 1-2 punch.
Definitely. I mean, these are two guys that, they're extremely athletic, lanky. I mean, with Brian Burns, you're talking 6'5", 6'6", about 220. With Josh Sweat, 6'5", 250. With Sweat, the hope, I think, if you're Florida State is, can he go a year without there being some sort of injury or at least, a long-lasting affair in the sense of, he's had knee, he's had finger. Of course, it felt like there were times last year where it wasn't one thing, it was the other. So, I mean, if you're FSU, you hope for Sweat, he can stay healthy. And if so, he and Burns could be two guys who off the edge have a lot of speed. Of course, they're the sort of, lanky figures that, they can get their arms on a quarterback maybe in a way that most couldn't. So it's going to be different from what you saw with DeMarcus Walker, where he was certainly more of a power sort of figured in. But with these two guys, there's power, but I think there's a lot more finesse, and I would argue athleticism as well.
I'm with you there. 44, of course, is going to be missed for his voice in the locker room. He's going to be missed because, well, I mean, back-to-back double-digit sack seasons speak for themselves. But
number 2 in the nation in sacks with 16, definitely.
There's your stat bomb, ladies and gentlemen. But you feel like with Burns and Sweat, maybe you've got the better all-round combo, not just guys who excel at one thing. And that's no shot at DeMarcus Walker. He was a great player. But you feel like these two can maybe complement each other better than Walker and Sweat did as the starters.
I mean, it's certainly possible, because I think the thing with Burns is he was a guy that, talking to high school coaches who played against him in South Florida, they were saying the biggest thing you had to game plan for was his speed. A lot of coaches said you were better off running at him than running away from him, because if you ran away from him, he could just chase you down off the backside. Whereas if running at him, you could at least throw up a double team, throw up something that at least tries to, slow down the inevitable. But, I mean, he's someone that, again, he gives you that speed, and with Sweat, I mean, I think he's someone that, when he was in high school, we were talking about him as, not only the number one defensive end in the nation, but people were wondering if he was the number one overall prospect before he suffered that horrific knee injury. And we've both seen just the flashes of what could be there. And if you're Burns, you want to build off of year one into year two. And with Sweat, he has 2 years of experience, and he's seen a lot. He's had a lot of experience. And he's someone who has all the tools available to really put it together.
Behind those two guys, there's a lot of talent, and you were quick to point out in your article, there's, however, a lot of inexperience.
There is, but I think at the same time, if you're FSU, this is kind of what you would plan for. Janarius Robinson is someone this team is very high on. He's a redshirt freshman who missed last year with shoulder injury. You've got Josh Kando coming in, he was a 5-star defensive end prospect. And I think those are going to be the two guys that are probably going to see the most playing time. It is going to be fascinating to see what happens with the rest of that group in terms of its depth. But for certain, I think after Burns and Sweat, you're going to look at Kando and Wilkerson. And I wouldn't be surprised if Kando ends up having a really good year. Because the thing about writing these previews is you know that freshman class they signed is really good. But when you think about all the players they got in the top 5, maybe top 6, you're looking at Akers, Wilson, and Kando. I mean, to get one of those guys would be good. 2 would be, phenomenal. But to get 3 guys like that in one class, it just says a lot. And look, obviously people talk about Marvin Wilson and Cam Akers for good reason. But Kando could have just as big of a year of a freshman player in the nation as those 2, as well as anyone.
Especially considering he gets on campus early and he gets a little bit more experience in that defense and that system and what's asked of him. I think that can make a big difference.
Well, it certainly can, and I think it helps. We've seen how early enrollment has helped guys before. It gives them a little bit of an advantage. You would think that when it comes to something like maturity, it allows them to kind of harness that as well. And I think that's going to be big because, again, you're talking about a group that while there's talent, there's still a little bit more development that needs to be done. And that's where I think if you're that defense, you look and you go, okay, the other advantages you have are you can bring Jacob Q in off the edge at Buck and have him attack that way. And not that I think we would see this every game or frequently, but we have seen them use Derwin James off the edge at practice. And, to have someone like that who can be an all-around weapon, that certainly helps. So, again, FSU has options. It's just a matter of how you develop.
Overall, before we move into defensive tackle, you talked about the options, and I know there hasn't been a lot of negativity about that defense. When you look at that depth chart, I mean, it's kind of hard to. But what do you feel like is the biggest strength of that defense, and what do you feel like is the biggest weakness after you've done all your research?
Strength really is just the depth in all sorts of different places. I mean, we'll get to a more defensive tackle, but there's depth there. There's depth with, what you have at linebacker, and there's depth at what you have at defensive back. And the reason why that's important, yes, it's because of injuries and when you keep guys fresh. And I know we're getting way too ahead of ourselves, but if you look at next year's defense, they could lose at least 8 or 9 starters, assuming guys go pro as well as the guys who are graduating. So developing that group now is going to be very important. I would say that would be the strength. The weakness of this defense is, I don't know if it's much of a weakness as much as it is, how are they going to do against mobile quarterbacks, run pass option schemes? Because against traditional quarterbacks and regular schemes, they do exceptionally well. But I think when you look at how someone like Mitch Trubisky was both mobile and accurate, what Lamar Jackson did, Deshaun Watson, it's going to be fascinating because you see it right out the gate with Alabama and Jalen Hurts. Because, look, everybody talks about what Hurts did, throwing the ball 23 touchdowns. But, I mean, he was someone who ran for, I believe, close to 960 yards. And that's about as much of a dual threat as it gets. So I think it's just going to be how do they do against those sort of schemes where athletes are at the control as opposed to your traditional pro-style quarterback.
One of the first places you mentioned when you talked about the depth on the defense was defensive tackle. And when your starters are DeMarcus Christmas and Derek Nottie, just the pure power of both of those. Wally Amy is ready to back up if necessary. And then, of course, Marvin Wilson, who is going to find himself some playing time this year, more than likely. This, to me, is just a place where when you talk about a team that's deep, Florida State is deep at D-tackle.
it's wild how deep they are, because between Christmas and Noddy, we have it in the story, but I want to say it's something ridiculous. Like, they've put together, they've combined to play more than 60 games and have close to like 35 to 40 starts, which within itself is incredible. But then when you go to that, what you expect to be the second team, there's Wally Ine, who he played in every game last year. He was someone who had 10 games of experience coming from junior college, which when you look at the different junior college guys FSU's had in recent memory, those guys are able just to get on the field quick, and it seems like it's a seamless transition. But then you think about Fred Jones, who he's another guy that played all 13 games. In fact, if I remember it correctly, I think it was, 23 players who played all 13 games last year. 4 of them were defensive tackles, and it was Noddy, Christmas, Ine, and Jones. And so that just says a lot to just kind of the depth they have, the versatility they have, but also just kind of, again, how they were fortunate to stay healthy. And so you have those 4. And then, of course, you just wonder, okay, how are some of these other veterans going to factor in? And then, of course, there's Marvin Wilson, which, I mean, do you kind of disrupt what you've got, with those pairings of Noddy and Christmas and Ine and Jones throw in Marvin Wilson? I mean, do you dare kind of, maybe sit him a year? I don't know. I mean, it's a big question FSU's going to have, but it's a good question to have, and to know that they can develop someone like this and develop him in a way where he's not rushed. I mean, really, I think that might be the biggest win for this defensive line group all season, is just knowing that you can take your time with someone like Marvin.
Ryan, don't have a ton of time left, but before we go, of course, fall camp starts today. Over the next couple weeks, as we lead up to Florida State, Alabama at the start of the season, putting your journalist cap on, what are the things you're really looking for out of Florida State?
I think it's a couple things. One, how will this team really handle the preseason hype? I mean, we think back to not spring 2017, but spring 2016, all the expectations, and then that day at practice, Fisher goes, this was a bad idea to build them up. And the second thing I think you're really looking for is just, again, what happens on that offensive line, more to the point at center. And then the final thing is, how will these freshmen make an impact? Because, yes, there's, again, the trio of Akers, Kendo, and Wilson. But, look, don't be surprised if Stanford Daniels fights Levante Taylor for that opposite corner spot of Tavares McFadden. So, again, these freshmen, they could play a big role.
Ryan, good stuff, as always. Looking forward to seeing you out there on the field. Talk to you again soon, my friend.
Hey, you got it. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, there's more on the other side. We're putting a bow on it on Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. All right, we're putting a bow on it here. Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. Ryan Kelly, joined again by Fletcher Keel of WCTV to close it out. My thanks, of course, to Ira Schafel and not Ira Schafel. Ira Schafel joined us yesterday. You can go back and listen to that show on podcast. Work that into a plug. That
Seamless plug. Shameless plug as well.
Seamless and shameless, sir. So... Ira Schafel was on yesterday's program. Gene Williams and Ryan Clark were on today's show, and we appreciate all of them coming. And, of course, thanks to you guys for listening, and thanks to For the Table for sponsoring the show. But before we go, we obviously don't delve into politics a lot on this show. We're not here to generate internet controversy, but we are here to tell you that Anthony Scaramucci became one of the quickest tenured, I would say, White House staffers of all time yesterday when he was, I guess, forced to resign at the White House, I guess is the word that's coming out. But it got me thinking, Fletcher, and I know you'll have a good one. What's your favorite short coaching tenure in sports?
Favorite shortest coaching tenure in sports?
I mean, Lane Kiffin at Tennessee comes to mind after he bolted for a year.
Lane Kiffin at USC also comes to mind.
To a certain extent. He was technically there for 3 seasons, technically.
It seems a lot shorter than that, however.
It does, and I'll also say this. Let's see. I think Barry Melrose in Tampa Bay is one that certainly gets it. I mean, what was that, 12 games?
Something like that.
It was something close to that, and I think, gosh, I'm missing a really good one. I had it at the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of it.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier.
Everywhere Todd Graham has gone except Arizona State.
And we were talking about this earlier off mic, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was I said. That was so good.
Todd Graham has been literally waiting for this moment because he has family in D.C., you know. I just want you to know that.
All right.
Fletcher, thanks so much, my man.
Hey, thanks, Ryan.
Appreciate it as always. And thanks to you guys for listening. It's Mike and Mike coming up next here on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.